Can you see the change? Can you see the change of slides?
Now is at the first slide, Doctor.
Sorry? Am I going to informative text? Do you see the change? Hello?
No, it's first slide.
Still first line.
What is this? Okay, now?
You stopped sharing.
This is fantastic. This is awesome. This is the best. This is great. Okay, what slide am I sharing now?
Page 5.
Okay. Now?
Yeah, we can
Page
see the
8.
change.
Sorry?
8.
Okay, all right, fine. I'm just going to go with whatever I'm given. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I apologize for this hiccup. Things happen for great reasons. Okay, so let's get started. For today's session, we're looking at text. This is still introductory lecture session for all of you. And I'm covering a wide area. You know, I'm like casting a net and trying to cover as many topics within this domain called text or discourse as possible. And within this area, I'm focusing on types and functions. Just before I forget, am I recording? Is this being recorded right now? Do you know?
Yes, Doctor. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. All right. Okay, now I'm sharing the slide called informative or expository text. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, sure.
So when you think about text, you know, this idea of text, I'm going to use the word text as a kind of a big umbrella. And within that umbrella, if you like, there are many subgenres. The word genre can be used to describe different categories of text. For the purpose of today's discussion, we have a few subgenres of text, and the first being informative or expository. You don't really need to memorize what are the different types of text, but these categorization would be useful for you when you're trying to describe a particular text that you are analyzing. You know, being able to use these kinds of terminology allows you to get into the discussion of the text faster. Okay, so when we talk about informative or expository, just the very word expository, the root word is to expose, right? So informative, obviously, to inform. You have various examples. Again, these are examples that may vary according to readers, but some of the examples include news, especially focusing on current news. Okay, let's do this. Okay, can you see the slide I'm sharing now?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay. So you've got news, current news, yeah, not to be mistaken with editorials. So we're looking at current news, scientific reports. We're also focusing on historical accounts. So to distinguish between current news, looking at the present, and historical accounts, looking at the past, these elements of expository or informative narrative is incorporated, as well as instructional textbook, reference textbook, with, you know, theory books, websites but on particular area, including like medical resources, like if you've got an eye infection or an ear infection or laryngitis and you go on websites, medical websites, these are informative genres. Then there's another type of genre of text called persuasive text. And by the very name, by the very terminology, it is to persuade you, to influence your belief, your values, your attitudes, your reaction. And there's many in the media today, especially with regards to the conflict in the Middle East. You see a lot of, pro-right, pro-left, the liberals, the conservatives, using the persuasive text to influence the audience, right? And the rhetorical appeals of persuasive text appeals to the credibility of the speaker. Who is the speaker, and how credible is the speaker, as well as it appeals to the reader's emotion. You as a reader or the audience, you get to select whose speech or thoughts will you be influenced by, hence the persuasive, right? Okay. With persuasive text, it might not sound like it, but there is some logic or reasoning, albeit the reasoning or the logic may be subjective to my value system or to a certain individual's value system, but there is some kind of a logic to it. I'm sharing slide 12. I hope you can see it. Refer to your individual slides if you want to as well. So with persuasive text, some of the techniques that you can pay attention to, especially when you are doing your analysis, includes the language, the kind of language that is being used, the emotive way in which ideas are expressed. I'm getting better at this. Okay. And certain words may be, certain ideas, certain words may be repeated, like in George Orwell's Animal Farm. Slogans are repeated to persuade, albeit it is a novella. It's not a political speech or an advertisement, right? Which is what a persuasive text could be. But George Orwell wrote it in a form of an allegory, and it is meant to create this kind of impression of political speeches and slogans. So there are certain techniques incorporated in that novella, George Orwell's Animal Farm. You've got questionings, the way the speaker, the writer addresses certain ideas, to question or to entice the audience and the reader to think in a certain. All right, so I want you to study the different subgenres, including the persuasive writing, and especially if there are certain parallels between these genres of writing, the informative, the persuasive, with the novels that you are studying, the fictions that you are studying. So look at narrative in terms of storytelling as a form of informative, expository, as well as persuasive writing. Okay? If you've got questions, please post it in our WhatsApp group and I will address them individually. Because like I said, I've got two groups here, the undergraduate and the master's students. So please post your questions in our class WhatsApp group. So with persuasive text, there's always some kind of a logic to the structure. You've got an introduction in which the audience or the reader is hooked to a particular argument. Then you have the body in which supporting evidence are presented. And then you've got the conclusion. Again, I refer to Animal Farm by George Orwell that presents this kind of rhetorics very clearly. So coming back to informative or expository text, I would like you to consider what kind of a text do you consume on a day-to-day basis. Maybe you consume news. Maybe you consume social media posts. Are these social media posts in the form of informative text, expository text, or are they in a form of persuasive text? Right? So think about the things that you are consuming on a regular basis, and look at the type of subgenres of text that they are, right? Then we want to go into another subcategory. Yeah, another subcategory of text, looking at the models that these texts embody, right? And these models, I'm sharing slide 16 just to double check. Can you all see it?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. So as I was saying, you look at text, the idea of text, and under the text you have different models of writing, how the writing is organized, how the ideas in the writing are organized. The first model will be chronological order. It's usually, going from one event to another event to another event, a kind of a chronology. And that chronology may be linear. It can be also going, foreshadowing and retrospective and introspective. That aspect is also incorporated. Historical documents, biographies, and linear stories tend to have this kind of chronological order. Yeah. Another one would be the cause and effect, and this kind of text organizes according to the relationship between why something happens and what is the consequence of why that happens. It explains why something is happening and the consequence of that happening, right? So that cause and effect. There was a pandemic and chaos, was spread around the globe. That kind of a cause and effect. So this kind of a narrative tends to be the cause and effect type of structure. And another model of discourse is looking at similarities and differences between subjects. Maybe looking at this idea of love or the idea of death, but looking at it from a different point of view. Maybe looking at it from an animal point of view or a human point of view, and comparing the two. Some stories, focus in that kind of a category. If you're doing Divergent by Veronica Roth, this kind of a compare and contrast will happen, because in Divergent there are many, there are 4 or 5 tribes or groups of people, categorized according to social class, according to interest, and there are differences and similarities between the groups, right? So compare and contrast is one way. Another one is problem and solution. Maybe there's a kind of a problem that is being introduced in the text, and the text also provides a solution. So I was thinking about this book. I remember reading this a while ago, by Prof. Mushtaq Al-Latabi, Think Like an Engineer. So it suggests a problem. It's like, if you are an engineer, or if you're doing something else and you want to think like an engineer to solve your problems, how can you go about doing that? So this book was written with that kind of a model. Then there are 2 other categories. So I'm going to skip this. So I'm now on slide number 22. So I want you to consider the kind of text that you are consuming on a day-to-day basis. How are these texts structured, and how are they organized? So as you reflect on them, the more you reflect on the way you consume text and the type of text that you are consuming, the more you digest it and reflect on it, the easier it becomes for you to pick it up. As you're reading more and you're reflecting more, it becomes easier for you to notice the difference between text, and it's easier later for you to start writing in that kind of a style, right? Maybe your presentation, you want to focus on problem and solution. Maybe in your essay or your presentation, you want to focus on compare and contrast, or cause and effect, or some form of chronological order. So having this template in mind actually helps many aspects of your literacy, not just your reading and your critical thinking, but also in your writing. So another discourse, I use text and discourse interchangeably, right? So be mindful of that. Another discourse is lyrical. This is something else that we consume all the time. It could be music. You're listening to songs, which is lyrical. It could also be poetry, which is also another kind of lyricism. So very quickly though, lyrical writing expresses ideas in a rhythmic, melodic fashion. It captures emotions in a more, poetic fashion, sometimes musical, with clear, vivid imagery, use of imagery. This past week, last week, in your respective classes, we looked at some lyrical works, be it a poem or songs. So I'm going to pick up some of the texts that we covered, especially the songs. So when you compare lyrical works, some of the things that you use in terms of comparison, of course, has to be literary devices. There are many literary devices, and these literary devices make your engagement with the text that much more enriching. So when you're reading a poem, for instance, you may consider, you consider how any poem that you have read, consider how the poet uses metaphor, symbolisms, or similes, or figurative language generally to convey an idea in any poem. And this idea, it can be the road not taken, that we covered with the master's class, or even any of the poems that you're familiar with. When we think about lyricism, lyrical writing, it is a kind of an expressive discourse, using emotion to express emotion, but done in a very beautiful, controlled manner. The language is very controlled. The figurative language used, it's meant to create puzzles in the text, where the reader or the listener needs to kind of decipher the puzzle. And those puzzles may be presented in a form of a metaphor or a simile, or certain words may be repeated in order to convey a message. So the message is not conveyed in a straightforward linear fashion. Rather, it is kind of couched within imageries and symbolisms, right? Oh no, some of the things that okay. I will be sending you a revised version of the slides. Some of the slides seem to be missing for some reason. I'll revise the slide and send you a cleaner copy. But another aspect of lyrical writing that I want to draw your attention to is social commentary. Lyrical writing may be used by writers, by poets, by singer-songwriters to address certain social issues. I'll show you a couple later in the later slides. They are to change mindsets, maybe values, to raise awareness, or even to inspire action. So lyrical writing is not just for entertainment. It's not just for just as a sparing of our emotions, but it is also to create advocacy in terms of issues. Another kind of narrative, or sorry, another kind of text or discourse is narrative text. So this is what your focus will be in your respective courses, be it at the undergraduate or the master's level, narrative text. So what are narrative texts? Narrative texts are, as you would know, all forms of stories, and that can be in a genre. Another subgenre of text would be narrative text, and under narrative text, you've got various types of narrative text. You've got novels, short stories, memoirs, biographies, autobiographies, and so on. And in popular culture, the kind of things that you consume in popular culture, including films, TV series, things you watch on Netflix, they are types of narrative text, right? So the central focus of a narrative text would be they focus on a kind of a plot. It's plot driven, yeah. And there are characters, there are settings, there are sequence of events. Albeit some stories might break these kinds of structure, but that's the beauty of consuming them. You as you read them, you come to understand how the storyteller is using the narrative techniques of characters, plot, setting, sequence of events to kind of rework the way stories are told. Might be the story is told with the end in mind. As you watch the story, you realize that this is what's happening now, and everything else in the story is flashback of things that happened in the past. That's one narrative technique, right? So stories don't need to be linear. It doesn't have to be the beginning, the middle, the end, but it can be in that format. So be mindful when you're reading a story. Look at the way the storyteller is telling the story. Is it in a linear fashion? Is the plot in a linear fashion? Or, are there other techniques being used? And of course, the primary purpose of narrative text is to entertain and engage the audience. However, over and above the primary aspect of entertainment, there are elements of a message that is being conveyed. Every story, as you know, will have a kind of a theme, and the theme tends to be more universal than just entertainment, right? That aspect needs to be a focus of us, the readers. So when we think about elements of narrative, I'm just going to go through this very quickly, but these are the key aspects that I want to see in your presentation, in your discussion of whatever text that you are focusing on, whether it's a short story, a novella, or a novel. I want you to look at some of these elements. So the first thing that I want to cover, and these are not necessarily in any order, it's just something that I want to kind of bring up. One aspect of a good storytelling is foreshadowing. Now, what's a foreshadowing? Foreshadowing is when there is a kind of a hint of things to come. You're reading a particular part of the story at the beginning, and sorry, just now I said foreshadowing. It's actually flashback. When a text is told and when the story starts from the end, and when the story, the rest of the story is conveyed, is actually presented in a form of flashback, not foreshadowing. I think there was a slip. So foreshadowing, when we think about foreshadowing, is imagine you're reading a story and there's something that is being hinted at. You as a reader, you just read it, you don't know what to make of it. But as you're reading further into the story, you realize that that aspect that was hinted at the beginning is now coming to pass. Shakespeare does this very often in his plays. Um, for instance, in Romeo and Juliet, a lot of Shakespeare's tragedies tend to use foreshadowing, especially the element of death. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare uses, incorporates foreshadowing when Romeo has a premonition of his own death before attending a particular party. It's almost like, he's about to enter a party. You would think it's a celebration, but he has a premonition of his own passing, his own death. So that element, you might not pick it up as you're reading it. You might not pick it up, but later when it unfolds, you realize that Shakespeare had already hinted at that at the early part of the play, at the start of the play. So that is an element of foreshadowing. Another important element of narrative is exposition. As the word suggests, it's to expose. So what is it that is being exposed? You as a reader, you're being exposed to the essentials of the story, the background of the story, and that includes the plot. What happened before this part of the story? This part of the story, what happened just before the plot begins in the story, the background of the story, basically, right? And a little bit more about the character. Who is the character? What has the character undergone before this particular element of the story began? That is being introduced in the exposition. Usually, in a classic Aristotle's plot line, if you draw a plot line in a like a pyramid shape, as the story is being unfolded, the exposition is happening, the rising action happens, right? So you see, for instance, in Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the exposition is when the writer introduces us to Harry Potter's backstory. Being raised as almost like an outcast in his uncle and auntie's family, away from the magical world and the mysterious circumstances of his parents' death. All this is not no spoilers alert. They are part of the exposition. They're not part of the building rising action of the story. That comes later. So the rising action is when, as the story is developing and the tension in the story becomes more intensified, the challenges that the character is experiencing is becoming more pronounced and more tense, right? More things are at stake, right? And in the Hunger Games, for instance, Susan Collins, the rising action unfolds as the central character navigates the various challenges of the Hunger Games, right? Opportunities to form alliances, escalating threats. Those aspects are part of the rising action. So I want you to distinguish between the exposition and the rising action. Any questions, please post it in the WhatsApp group. So now, another aspect of narrative techniques is the conflicts. So every story will have some form of conflict, right? So think about narrative, think about storytelling or stories as a mirror to our lives. Everybody's lives has some form of conflict. There is nobody on earth not you, not I, that can say we don't have any conflict in our life. There's no tension, there's no drama in our life. No, everybody's story, everybody's life has some form of conflict. And those conflicts can be categorized within these categories. It could be a conflict between man and himself, or human, the individual and themselves. So this would be more internal conflict, right? So those kinds of stories tend to have more interior monologue. The story is focusing within the mind of the character, the central character. Then you have conflicts that are more external. So this is more interior or internal monologue. So hence it's internal struggles. And the others would be more external type of conflicts. So internal conflicts and external types of conflicts. And external types of conflict can be conflict between man and man, meaning individuals from opposing families, for instance, or different tribes, right? Or between the individual and authority figure. You see this in the kind of stories that you will be reading. Or it could be between man and the elements of nature, forces of nature, environmental, supernatural forces of nature, or man in society. So that becomes a lot bigger, this idea of conflicts. So these elements make the story engaging. It makes the story enticing for the reader, right? You're drawn into it because of the conflict. And of course, another element of narrative is climax. That's the pivotal moment in which the tension in the story, it is at its most highest level, right? Most intense. If you're watching a movie, for instance, you're literally at the edge of your seat. You're not sure what's going to happen next, kind of a thing. It's the most engaging, most suspenseful part of the story. And that is also when, as the climax is reached, the characters, the protagonist, for instance, he or she is taken to the most most significant development, where he has to meet his biggest rival, or has to fight the Dark Lord, or some kind of resolution will come from that kind of a engagement. Following the climax, of course, you've got the falling action, or the resolution of the story. And that usually happens towards the end, almost close to the end of the story, maybe the last chapter or two. And another aspect that I want you to focus on is how the narrative text engages the reader through the choice of perspective. So what that means is, there might be a story, this is one story, but the story is told from a particular narrative voice and a particular point of view. And that narrative voice and point of view may cause you, the reader, either to be influenced in a particular way, or to be confused in a particular way, right? So be mindful of that narrative voice. So there are three aspects or three types of narrative voice that I want to focus on. And I want you to realize that these narrative voices help make the story that much more engaging, interesting, but also sometimes subjective. All right. So the first narrative voice is, of course, the first person. The first person would use words like I and me. And there are many strengths and weaknesses to this kind of a narrative voice. Of course, the advantage of it is that you, as a reader or an audience member, you find affinity with the narrator, with the speaker of the story, there is a kind of an intimate connection, because it's almost like you're going through this yourself. It's almost like you are experiencing this yourself. But the disadvantage is that first person narrative voice tends to create a very limited perspective, because you're only seeing the story from that character's point of view. Now I'm going to draw I'm going to show you some songs in which the first person point of view is being used in a song. Okay, this is a song by James Taylor called Copper Line. Just a quick glance, if you do a quick scan through it, you realize the words is constantly being used, right? I was wondering, I saw, I tried. So that in itself already indicates this is a first person point of view, right? And as you're reading this song, the lyrics, the minute the word I is being used, it's almost like you're talking about yourself, right? I was wondering since the age of 2 down on Copper Line. One time I saw my daddy dance, watch him move like a man in a trance. And then later I tried to go back as if I could, all spec house and ply. The minute you use the word I, even though you are the one reading, you're the reader, you reading it as I allows you to kind of be more connected to the narrator. So that's the benefit or the strength of first person point of view. Another example is another song by The Killers called Human. Again, you scan through it, you have words like I, we, right? We there. Listen to the lyrics. I did my best to notice when the call came from the line up to the platform of surrender. I was brought, but I was sometimes I get nervous when I see an open door. So as you're reading it or as you're listening to it, it's almost like you are saying this yourself because of the use of the first person. Okay. Another narrative technique narrative voice is second person narrative voice, and it's you looking at that individual. The narrator addresses the reader directly. So you're being addressed in this context. Rather than you're the one speaking as a narrator, you're being addressed. It also creates a kind of an intimacy, because it's like as if the song is written for you, as if the speaker is directing the ideas or the issues close to you. This is not this is not used as often, but it is also. Another song lyric is called Vienna. The title of the song is Vienna by Billy Joel. You see the lyric. This is the opening of the song. Slow down, you crazy child. You're so ambitious for a juvenile. But then, if you're so smart, tell me, why are you still so afraid? So, as you're listening to this lyric or if you're listening to the song, it's almost like the singer is talking to you, right? The choice of the second person, right? Where's the fire? What's the hurry about? You better cool off before you burn it out. You've got so much more to do, but only so many hours in a day. So again, that use of the second person engages the speaker, engages the audience or the listener. Another song entitled Rainbow by Casey Musgrave. The line is, when it rains, it pours, but you didn't even notice. It ain't raining anymore. It's hard to breathe when all you know is the struggle of staying above the rising water line. The chorus part here. If you could see what I see, you'll be blinded by the colors. Yellow, red, orange, and green, at least a million others. So tie up the boat, take off your coat, and take a look around, because the sky has finally opened. The rain and wind stop blowing, but you're stuck out in the same old storm again. You hold tight to your umbrella, yet, darling, I'm just trying to tell you that there's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. So the song is almost like it's an encouraging type of a song, right? But the speaker is speaking directly to the listener. It's almost like the speaker is reaching across the radio waves and saying like, listen, don't worry about it. Things are gonna look up. Let go of your umbrella and forget about that old storm. Things are moving up. You got to just be prepared to see the possibilities. There's always been a rainbow hanging over your head. So that line kind of encourages the speaker to address the audience directly. Another one is by Bob Dylan. This is the kind of song that is I wanted to show it here, but I think I missed the slide. This is the kind of a lyrical writing that is more of a social commentary, creating lyrical writing for advocacy, for social change, or raising awareness, inspiring action. So just listen to the lines. Okay, I love this song. Think about this line that he says: you may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble. You may like to dance. You may be a heavyweight champion of the world. You might be a socialite with a long string of pearls, but you gotta have to serve somebody. You gotta have to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you gotta have to serve somebody. I love that idea that you can be great, you can be a gambler, you can be a champion of the world, but whatever role that you're playing in life, you are serving someone. And who are you serving? Of course, Bob Dylan is bringing in religious sensibilities in the song. The idea of you serve either God or you serve the devil. This idea of serving someone. So but this particular point I'm raising here is he's using second person point of view and speaking directly to the listener. As he's entertaining us, he's actually creating advocacy. He's creating social commentary. And finally, the third person point of view. Of course, with third person point of view, the narrator is not a member of the story, not a character in the story, and that bias, that objectivity can come in various forms. Because the third person narrator is not a character in the story, it can come in a few manners. It can be objective, it can be limited, it can be omniscient. So when you're reading a third person narrator, you have to ask yourself, does the narrator know everything about the story or the character, or does the narrator only know selected information, right? So if it is objective, it is an objective, unbiased account, but the thoughts and feelings of the characters are not revealed to us. For instance, this song by the Beatles, Eleanor Rigby, it talks about Eleanor Rigby and captures the story of Eleanor Rigby, but we don't really know what goes through Eleanor Rigby's mind, right? So this is a more objective third person point of view. Another one is Renee and Georgette Magritte by Paul Simon, capturing the migrant stories, in the song. It's very objective. It captures the migrant eyes and the migrant experience through these two individuals called Renee and Georgette Magritte, husband and wife, and their dog, during the Second World War. But you don't know what's going on in their mind, right? So the third person objective tends to be unbiased, but it's quite limited. And then there are other types of third person narrating that is presented in stories. You've got third person omniscient, limited. So the advantage and disadvantage of third person narrative is, the advantage is it provides a broader perspective. Sometimes you as a reader, it's almost like this eye in the sky. You get to see everything, right? But the disadvantage is it kind of creates an emotional distance. You don't quite know the character as wide, as closely as you would in a first person point of view. And with omniscient narrative technique, third person narrative technique, it provides a very comprehensive understanding of the story. However, it reduces the suspense, the surprise factor, right? Then you've got the unreliable, you've got the multiple. Some stories, it is told from different characters' point of view. It's almost like every chapter is told from a different character's point of view. And another technique that you may want to also explore is this idea of stream of consciousness, in which the narrator just gives you an unfiltered thought and feeling of the character, without any filters, just everything and anything. Virginia Woolf, pioneered this kind of a writing technique at the turn of the 20th century. So that's one. Just a couple more slides. Another thing that we want to also take into consideration with stories is you have to differentiate between the author, the one who's writing, and the narrator. Okay, like for instance, George Orwell wrote Animal Farm, or Robert Frost wrote The Road Not Taken. You have to differentiate between the poet or the writer, the author, and the narrator in the text that is being used to tell the story. Okay, so in your presentation, in your discussion, be mindful that when you're discussing the text, it is not about the writer, but rather the narrative voice that is being used, right? So in your presentation, focus more on the narrative voice. Okay, finally, for this week, whether you are doing your undergraduate or your master's, both groups, you're focusing on looking at the different texts that I've asked you to read, either in groups or in pairs. Consider these questions as a guiding question. I will be sending each group a more focused task sheet for the week. But these are some questions that will be a guiding question for you. How is the story structured? Think back at the beginning, I talked about the different types of structure in storytelling: chronology, compare, contrast, cause, effect, right? A linear fashion. How is the story that you're reading, how is it structured? Second question is, how do the narrative perspective affect your experience? How does the narrative perspective affect your experience understanding the story? Basically, if it's a first person narrative point of view, how does that affect you? Whose point of view is missing, right? If it's first person as you're reading the story. Or if it is third person, is it third person objective? Is it third person subjective, limited? Whose perspectives is missing? When you're reading the story, ask these kinds of questions, right? And does the point of view make the story more relatable? Does it make you relate with the character, or does it make you distance yourself from the character? Okay, so these are questions that will help you in the coming week. Okay, so that's the end of the lecture, and it's good timing too, 6 o'clock. So I will allow you to kind of go back to your respective groups, and as you're reading the various texts that you're reading, focus on these elements, come back to the lecture notes, and use the points that are being introduced in the lecture in your discussion. Make sure you incorporate that in your discussion, and I will see you in class next week. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.